Alright everyone, now following up to our previous video where we created this workspace, right now let me just try to go through these files and then explain what exactly they do, and then we'll just take it from there. So essentially we have this lib.rs file, which is the entry point to your smart contract. It declares an ID which is a default ID which will change when we have actually built our contract and gotten a new ID. But this is simply declaring as a security measure that this code will be actually deployed at this code ID. We also have a mod or a module for Rust, and this is how you define that this is a Solana program with a macro called hash program. And we are taking in a number of libraries from Anchor. So this defines a number of tools, or it brings in all of the dependencies that we really need to make it easier at our end. It also exposes a function called initialize, which takes in a context called initialize and returns a result. By default, we're not doing anything, and that's how we're returning OK. If you know a bit about Rust, you know that essentially there is no semicolon. So essentially this result is automatically sent as a return value to this function whenever it is called. And this context is essentially defined here, which is essentially an account on the blockchain. Or in this case, it's providing a context with all of the accounts using the macro hash derive, and then currently there is nothing else inside this struct. Our compiler is complaining that the context variable is not being used right now, and that's why you see an error. But for now, this is like a very simple smart contract that declares a function called initialize that accepts parameters which are currently do not have any other key values, and then it returns an OK result every time. So now let's just try to build the smart contract. So what we can do is we can just do anchor build. Let me just first go to the staker directory and then run anchor build. So what it is doing is it's trying to use and compile all of these dependencies that Anchor has brought in, and essentially in the end it will create a key pair and a .so, which is the actual program code that will be uploaded to the Solana blockchain. So for now, let's just wait for these dependencies to be compiled, and we'll come back as soon as it's done. Alright, so our program has been compiled. It says a warning that the context variable is not being used, which is expected at this point, and it says that if it is intentional, you can prefix by underscore, which in case the compiler will stop warning us about it. Finally, what it did is it had actually created a key pair and in the target folder. So here essentially inside target deploy staker.so, this is our program's shareable object, and then we have a key pair which defines the program ID. So what we should do is let's just use Solana keygen pub key on this key pair just to figure out our program address. I think, yeah. So this is essentially what our program address is. So what we need to do, Solana keygen is again a CLI command that comes when you install Solana. So I'll just copy this and replace it in my lib.rs and in our workspace. Not here, essentially in the main workspace in anchor.toml, we'll say that this is our program ID for the local net. And similarly, you'll have it for the devnet and mainnet as we go through those. So now I'll click on, I'll initialize the build process again, and I'll check my pub key, which in case is the same. So now we have defined that our program is essentially referencing the right public key. Again, our program has now been built, and there is a test already which tries to initialize the function and simply checks the transaction go through. And I can simply do anchor test, which finds this test and then tries to run it, and it says that you got the transaction and it is passing. So essentially, using simply the anchor init command, we were able to create a workspace where we already have a smart contract with an entry point called initialize. You were able to build it, you were able to replace the public key, and then you were able to test it using our test command.